The Secretary also made clear yesterday that as we begin the transition, we will also continue to serve the current Commander-in-Chief with our full effort, and that means continuing to address the national security challenges that confront us. Among those is the ongoing military campaign to defeat ISIL, and I'd like to provide you a quick operational update on that. In Iraq, Iraqi security forces continue to apply pressure on multiple fronts in the operation to retake Mosul. The advances so far are forcing ISIL to choose where they want to try and defend the city. To their credit, Iraqi security forces continue to take steps to minimize civilian casualties. The coalition continues to do the same when it comes to the air campaign. Specifically in the east, Iraqi counterterrorism forces continue to deliberately isolate and clear areas of the eastern districts, securing key neighborhoods. To the north, Bashika has been retaken, although some back-clearing still continues, and there has been more progress in clearing the towns of Bawiza and Said, bringing the ISF within 2 kilometers approximately of Mosul. South of Mosul, Iraqi forces consolidated control of al-Rashid and Sahima, and they completed the clearance of Abbas Rajab. In Syria, the SDF continued their drive toward Raqqah, and they continue to make progress against moderate ISIL resistance. ISIL forces in Syria are also under pressure from Turkish-supported Syrian opposition forces, which liberated a number of towns and villages southeast of Dabiq. The momentum in Iraq and Syria has, of course, been assisted by coalition support, including air power. Yesterday, coalition forces conducted more than a dozen strikes, employing 74 munitions in support of operations towards Raqqah, and 7 strikes using aircraft and artillery, and employing 67 munitions supporting ISF and Kurdish operations near Mosul.
Comment on the report by Amnesty International that there have been a number of unlawful killings and torturing of civilians by the Iraqi federal police outside of Mosul in the last 4 hours.
We've seen those reports from Amnesty International, and I know this was a question that we got the other day as well, and obviously we have concerns about those reports and any indication of human rights abuses in Iraq in the course of this campaign would cause us concern. And of course, we would expect the Iraqi government to investigate all of these allegations, as Prime Minister Abadi has indicated he would be prepared to do. This is a situation where those forces coming in, any reports like this should be completely investigated, and we would call on the Iraqi government to carry out that kind of investigation.
The Secretary expressed any concern about any of his signature policies, perhaps on, Force the Future or anything like that, being quickly undone by a Trump administration. And has he reached out to members of Congress to try and seek any protections for any of his policies?
You've heard the Secretary speak several times, including most recently in discussing Force the Future. He was asked this question at City College of New York. The Secretary is confident that good ideas survive, and that the good ideas that he's put in place, specifically with regard to making sure that our forces get the kind of support they need to continue to be the finest fighting force the world has ever seen into the future, and that the Force the Future initiatives are all initiatives that make sense today and will make sense in the future, and so he's confident that those good ideas will survive. And
There's a report from Reuters quoting an Iraqi military advisor, saying the Iraqi forces are actually only in control of 2 districts, and that the operation is not going as well as he had hoped. An Iraqi military official said he called the Mosul operation a nightmare. And have Iraqi forces paused their campaign? And perhaps these optimistic predictions, were they a little premature?
Again, you can talk to the Iraqis, I'm sure. If Fox has crews there, you can see for yourself the results that they're seeing on the ground. I don't know the source of these particular comments, but the Iraqi security forces are seeing results on the ground in Mosul. I think anyone who's there can see that for themselves. And so we'll leave it to the Iraqis to characterize their performance as well. We're seeing what we're seeing on behalf of the coalition. We're providing the enabling support. We've also said all along that this is going to be a difficult fight, and ISIL is a difficult enemy, and this is an urban environment that we've opened.
In the west of Mosul, the Shiite Hashd al-Shabi, the Popular Mobilization Unit, say they have cut the road between Mosul and Syria. Is that correct?
My understanding is there has been at least one of the roads heading west has been severed in terms of the line of communication to the lines to Syria. There may be other pathways to the west, but that has been, one roadway has been at least cut off, is my understanding.
A key roadway.
Yes.
Going back to the transition quickly, you've mentioned Secretary Carter is focused on serving this president. Has he emphatically ruled out working for President-elect Trump?
He serves at the pleasure of this president, and he's focused on that.
So he has not made any comment about the potential for continuing in the role?
We are serving, the Secretary is here serving President Obama, and will continue in that role, and that's his commitment right now. This is the greatest military in the history of the earth, and this Secretary feels very strongly about maintaining that edge, maintaining that force, and he's done everything he can to try and ensure, once again, that that continues into the future. Tara.
Thanks, Peter.
Question, Bob. As you know, the international coalition has been carrying out a very substantial air campaign for months now in both Iraq and Syria, and we anticipate that that will continue. We anticipate that there will be significant air support provided both to the campaign in Mosul and to the campaign to isolate and ultimately liberate Raqqah. And we will continue to assess the
Use of ground forces, U.S. ground forces, aside from the advising operation?
Bob, our forces, as you know, and we don't discuss in detail what our forces are doing in Syria, but they are continuing to provide the advise and assist mission. And at this point, that has not changed.
So no additional ground role other than the one we've heard about?
As Iraq CTS forces move in on Mosul, are the U.S. advisors that were with those, accompanying those units, are they still with them, and are they going into Mosul with them?
We still have advisors on the ground with the ISF and with Peshmerga forces and with CTS forces. They remain, again, behind the forward line of troops, and they will continue that mission.
But if that forward line is now inside Mosul or close to it, does that mean that U.S. forces are also at that proximity to Mosul or inside the city limits?
My understanding is that we do not have forces inside the city limits at this particular moment in time, but as you know, this will be a conversation that the command.
Thanks, Peter. Can you tell us a little bit more about the role the Apaches are playing in the Mosul offensive? Are they flying over Mosul yet, or are they still limited to nighttime operations?
I'm not going to get into all the tactical details, for one, because I'm not sure about each and every instance, Christina. But as you know, this is a capability that is quite powerful, quite lethal, and can operate from a standoff position, can provide a kind of close air support that, as I understand it, from troops who've benefited from having Apaches in the fight, a psychological advantage, if you will, in terms of just physical support in their advance. I believe that's how it's been used in this instance. My understanding is there's been particular targets have included VBIDs and specific, some of the obstacles and impediments that we've seen ISIL put forward in Mosul, and that the Apaches have demonstrated a capability with very precise targeting to make a difference there. Again, operating in a standoff position, they're able to do that from some distance back. Yes, Carla.
Thanks, Peter. A top Iranian general gave an interview to state-run press, and they said that Iranian forces conducted an airstrike inside eastern Iraq against ISIS. It was done over the weekend at the request of the Iraqis. Did the U.S. Know about this strike? Was the U.S. aware? Did they give approval of this strike? Or was this done without any U.S. knowledge?
I'll have to take that question. It's the first I've heard of it, and I would make the point that this is Iraqi territory. The sovereign government of Iraq would decide what foreign forces would operate, as they do with the coalition. And so I will take your question, but I would also refer you to the government of Iraq for any better explanation as to if that took place, why it took place. Yes, Qasim.
Yesterday, over the weekend, that the United States have provided them with anti-tank missiles. Could you confirm?
I'm not aware of those particular comments. As you know, there are members of the Syrian Democratic Forces that we have provided ammunition and equipment to, the Syrian Arab Coalition in particular. So I'm happy to take that question, but I'm not aware specifically of that reference.
To what extent you are confident that any of those kinds of arms, like tow missiles, would not end up in the hands of PKK?
As you know, Qasim, the decision to provide equipment to and ammunition to any partnered force there is a transaction and is based on commitments that we obtain from those partnered forces, and we expect them to abide by those commitments, including maintaining control over ammunition and equipment that might be provided, and those are commitments that we hold our partnered forces to. And we would anticipate that that is what will happen going forward.
Can you give an estimation of the number of Apaches that are in Iraq, and say if there are any plans to send more of them in Iraq?
Let me take that question. Let me double check how many we have, but I believe it's single digits in terms of the number of Apaches, but let me double check if I can provide more specificity. And at this point, I'm not aware of any request for additional capabilities, but this is something that General Townsend, of course, and General Votel certainly can pursue with the Secretary should they feel they need more capabilities in Iraq and as part of the counter-ISIL effort.
Just a quick follow-up. Is it the first time that they were used in the Mosul's offensive, or had they already been used?
As I mentioned, we've used the Apaches previously in Iraq. But I was pointing this out just specifically that they have been used since the launch of the Mosul.
Peter, on the question of a few minutes ago about the possibility of U.S. troops entering Mosul as the Iraqi front line moves forward into Mosul, they stay behind, but entering the city limits. Every time we have asked this question, in fact, it goes along with what you said, the door has been kept open by the Pentagon to the possibility, no one has ever shut the door, that U.S. troops would enter Mosul. So it seems to be that would be a very, by any measure, a significant development. You mentioned that a decision to do that, keeping the door open, and a decision to enter Mosul would be made by General Townsend and would be made on the ground. My question is, it seems...
There's another key point, and that is in consultation and with the Iraqis who are leading this fight. This is a fight that Prime Minister Abadi and his commanders are leading and directing with the support of the coalition, and of course they'll play a critical role in this. They will be doing they're leading the fight here, and they'll play a role in terms of determining the support from the coalition.
Sure. But given that everything I don't want to repeat everything. All right, so let's say they ask, and the decision by the U.S. side is made on the ground. It seems so significant. I do want to ask you, would it not be the case that this type of decision would go to the Secretary and even to the President if U.S. troops were being asked to enter Mosul? I just don't understand why. I want to make sure I understand. Would this not be so significant it would go to the Secretary and the President?
Barbara, I'm not going to get into a discussion of authorities here. You know the mission that our forces are currently performing in Iraq, the advise and assist mission with the Iraqis that allows them, in some instances, to accompany.
Absolutely. So thank you. Given everything you just said, is it correct then that we should interpret the Pentagon's position is all to be discussed, all to be decided on all fronts, but in fact, the door is still open to U.S. troops entering Mosul? You are not ruling that out.
Barbara, we've had forces provide assistance to and advise and assist, and in some cases, a small number accompany Iraqi security forces, Kurdish Peshmerga, and CTS up to this point. And decision going forward as to how much further to go, again, will be something that will be determined by commanders working with the Iraqis. We don't want to hypothesize as to where things go. The Iraqis have made significant progress so far. and we'll continue to provide support to them in close consultation, but I'm not going to. Paul.
There have been some reports from NGO humanitarian groups that in southeast of Mosul, there have been some incidents of men and teenagers, male teenagers, being rounded up and publicly abused, in some cases tortured. The reports that I've seen attribute it to local militias. Have you seen those reports, and can you talk at all about?
I have seen the. Are you talking about areas that have been retaken by ISF forces? I'm not in particular familiar with those reports. I certainly have seen the reports about ISIL. We've heard from the United Nations and others, human rights groups, about ISIL forcing.
So not ISIL. These are some sort of militia who are fighting ISIL, or at least under the banner of the groups that are fighting ISIL.
Yeah, I have not personally seen those reports. I certainly have seen the comments from Prime Minister Abadi, who continues to call for zero tolerance for any indications of sectarian strife and anything to target those who have been liberated so far in this movement towards Mosul. So I'm not aware, Paul, of that particular reference, and if you get more details, I'm happy to try and get an answer for you. But this is something that I know Prime Minister Abadi and the Secretary have talked about directly in the lead up to these operations, and I think Prime Minister Abadi, to his credit, has been very vocal and very public about the need to be very careful for any indications of human rights abuses by ISIL and by anyone else for that matter.
Do you know, in terms of protecting these people as and if they leave the area, and then protecting the camps where they're headed, do you know if there's a certain policy in place for who provides that kind of security? Is it the units that are in that region, or are there specific units that are tasked with doing that? Do you know?
I refer you to the Iraqis. My understanding is that the Iraqi security forces have plans in place to handle displaced people. There have been certainly a number of displaced people who have shown up at the UN camps, and that there are certain, my understanding, Paul, and again, I would encourage you to talk to the Iraqis, is that there are, in certain instances, as they clear neighborhoods, as they clear villages, there are designated locations where displaced people are encouraged to gather so that they can make the trip to some of these tent communities, these emergency camps that have been set up. And and at that point, again, it's the Iraqi security forces who've been in charge of that so far. Qasim?
We have seen in Fallujah, in Ramadi, in Raqqah, in several other places that Shia militias abused human rights. And what gives you the confidence that the Iraqi government is going to protect the civilians against the Shia militias? You know, we have seen examples of this several times, and we haven't seen any action, credible action from the Iraqi Baghdad government against these types of actions other than just words. Well, what makes you confident in?
Well, again, we have the commitment from Prime Minister Abadi, the leader of the Iraqi government, who's spoken to what was alleged to have happened previously in Fallujah, for example. And we would, again, look to the leadership of Iraq to monitor this reports of this and to investigate them thoroughly, as I know Prime Minister Abadi said would happen after Fallujah. And